All right, we're going to start. I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council, May 5th, 2014, to order. I hope Mr. Marmee comes. Autumn, please call the roll.
Mr. Guthrie.
Here.
Ms. Hall. Here. Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Marmee.
Here.
Mr. Rath.
Here.
Mr. Roletta.
Here.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Bub.
Here.
Mr. Cost.
Here.
Mrs. Floyd. Here.
We have all present. Next on the agenda this evening, we have the invocation by Mrs. Floyd. Please rise.
I just thought I would mention before the prayer that today the Supreme Court approved the right of people to have a prayer before a town hall or a city council meeting. So, amen. Would you bow your heads, please? Almighty God, we thank you that spring is finally here, sort of. We ask that you be with all of those who are out and about. Ask that people be more careful as citizens are outside more often, particularly young people who might run into the street. We ask that you be with our city workers as they go about all the duties that come with spring, all the mowing and all those things that go on. We ask that you give us guidance and wisdom as we make decisions tonight. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Mr. Evans.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd and Mr. Evans. Sorry. I answered here for you. Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's a time for council to discuss anything that may be on the agenda this evening. Do we have anything? Okay. Next, we have the minutes for the April 21st, 2014 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Rath. Second. Second by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have 5 reports of standing committees this evening. One from Finance, Recreation, Service, Safety, and Capital Improvements. Without objections, those will be received and filed. We have 1 report this evening from city officials, one from Barb Jobs, the Income Tax Administrator. The report is of April 15, 2014. Again, without objection, that will also be received and filed. We have 6 communications this evening. Also, without objections, those will be received and filed. Next on the agenda tonight, we have comments from citizens. There are 2 sections where you can comment. Is there anyone who would like to comment this evening in this first section? Okay. Next, we have ordinances on the first reading. Ordinance 14-04.
Ordinance 14-04A by Mr. Roletta, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Rath, Mr. Blake, an ordinance amending Chapter 618 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Newark, Ohio to require that all dogs be leashed when off the premises of the dog owner.
14-04A will be held for a second reading. Next, we have 14-10.
Ordinance 1410 by Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as 188 Dio Drive, City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of Newark Township to LV Limited Intensity Business District.
1410 will be referred to the Planning Commission. Next, we have resolutions on the second reading, 14-29.
Resolution 14-29 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the City of Newark to prepare and submit an application to the Ohio Development Services Agency for a Community Housing Impact and Preservation Program Grant Award for federal fiscal year 2014.
You've heard the second reading of 14-29. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake.
Move to adopt Resolution 1429.
Motion by Mr. Blake, second by Mrs. Floyd to adopt 14-29. Is there any discussion on 14-29? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-29 has passed. Next, on the second reading, we have 14-30.
Resolution 14-30 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to submit an application to the Ohio Department of Public Safety Office for fiscal year 2015 Ohio Traffic Safety Grant Program.
You've heard the second reading of 14-30. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake.
Move to adopt Resolution 1430.
Motion by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Do we have any discussion on 14-30? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-30 has passed. Next, we have 14-32.
Resolution 14-32 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating and disappropriating monies for current expenses of municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 14-32. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Blake.
Move to adopt Resolution 1432.
Motion by Mr. Blake. Second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 14-32? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-32 has passed. Next, we have 14-33.
Resolution 14-33 by Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing the clerk of council to submit a request to the Licking County Auditor to certify the total current tax valuation of the city of Newark, Ohio, in the dollar amount of revenue that would be generated from an additional tax of 2 mills.
You've heard the second reading of 14-33. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Bub.
I'll move that we adopt Resolution 14-33.
Motion by Mr. Bub. Sorry. Second by Mr. Johnson. Do we have any discussion on 14-33? Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-33 has passed. Finally, on resolutions on the second reading, we have 14-34.
Resolution 14-34 by Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into contracts subject to the appropriation of funds for various construction projects.
You've heard the second reading of 14-34. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Cost.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 1433.
Motion by Mr. Cost.
Second.
Second by Mr. Blake. Is there any discussion on 14-34? Mr. Guthrie.
Mr. President, I'm going to vote against this, and it's a very difficult vote for me because for a couple reasons. One, 4 out of the 5 items in this legislation I'm supportive of. But the bottom line is that when our police and fire staffing is at or below what it was when we passed the safety levy in 2001, I have come to the conclusion that my feeling is that it's not wise for us to proceed with building a new fire station at this time. And I don't take exception to anybody else's position on this issue. And to be honest, I go back and I look at a couple mistakes that, or one in particular that I believe that I made by supporting a formula change for the EMS distribution. We're really in a position, as much as anything as a result of that, of not being able to do some of the things we, in my opinion, should be doing as far as staffing. I do hope that we fill these two vacancies, one that has occurred and another one's going to occur with the fire department. I know that we are below where we were 10 years ago in both those divisions, and I just feel like, from my perspective, by voting to build a new fire station 1, that I'm placing bricks and mortar above public safety, and I just can't bring myself to do it. Thank you.
Any other comment or any other discussion on 14-34? Seeing none, I'll please call the roll vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
No.
Ms. Hall?
No.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-34 has passed. Next, we have resolutions on the first reading, 14-36.
Resolution 14-36 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of municipal corporation.
Mr. President,
14, yes, Mr. Blake?
move to waive the 2-day reading rule on 1436.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on 14-36 by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, there's some dates approaching that are coming to pay the notes that are related to this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Autumn, please call the roll vote to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Blake?
Move to adopt resolution 1436.
Motion by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any other discussion on 14-36? Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
And Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
14-36 has passed. Next on the first reading, we have 14-37.
Resolution 14-37 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating and disappropriating monies for current expenses of municipal corporation.
14-37 will be held for a second reading. Next, we have 14-38.
Resolution 14-38 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Ohio Governor's Office of Criminal Justice Services for fiscal year 2014 Edward Byrne Justice Assistance Grant funding.
14-38 will be held for a second reading. And finally, this evening, we have 14-39.
Resolution 14-39 by Mr. Blake, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, and Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
14-39 will be held for a second reading. And that is it for the legislation this evening. Thank you for your attention. Next on the agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Would anyone like to make a comment? Mr. Moran?
Thank you, sir. Paul Moran, 63 North 4th Street. This is someone talk about bringing, the city would like to see the city bring a new downtown retail. And there's a lot of benefits if they would do that, like if we could have a Dairy Queen or a Subway come in downtown, there'd be a lot of positives from, if we could get these chain companies to come in. There's plenty of empty lots throughout downtown. Like 3rd Street, West Main, there's empty lots all over the place that we could have all kinds of retail. It would give jobs, it would have revenue coming in. It would help the youth, give them things to do. There's a lot of youth I know who are looking for work, but there's nothing available here. They can't get to Hebron, they can't get to Tascola or anywhere else to get to those jobs. I think we need to focus on bringing stuff in here to help our youth and others with the the situation, economy and stuff. Make them more responsible by having a job. But, I would like to encourage that we could come up with tax breaks to bring in these kind of businesses. I mean, we look at Heath, you got Sonic, you got IHOP and others that are recent years that opened up. And I'd like to see something like that come into downtown, that kind of business revenue. It would be a great benefit to everybody in the long run. Just encourage something can move on with this. Or open public meetings or something. A committee can be put together. I don't see where the Chamber of Commerce is working. You're bringing new retail downtown. I don't see anything movement like that. They seem to be focused on industrial parks outside the downtown district, getting new memberships outside of downtown, basically. I just hope that things can turn around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Anyone else this evening for the last section of citizens' comments? Okay. Anyone from the administration this evening with a comment? Our award-winning auditor. Yes. Honorable Law Director.
Mr. President, I'll pass.
Mr. Guthrie.
Thanks, Mr. President. First, I want to say that the Merle Haggard concert was excellent last night. I to thank Mr. Moran. He always comes forward and provides positive ideas for our community event. I think we all got a exciting invitation today regarding project on the south side of the square. All looking forward to. I want to say a word of compliment regarding how things are going back here on the facade on the 4th Street demo. It's really going to look nice. And compliment everybody who was involved in that to make the end result a good one. But the only other thing that I want to mention is that, and I don't know what kind of feedback other people are getting, but in the community I've been getting pretty much all positive feedback regarding the sewer separation project downtown. I think everybody knows that it's needed and is supportive of it, but the feedback is not positive regarding much of the rest of that project. And I just hope that as we get closer to reality on the phase that would involve the streetscape and the roundabouts and the two-way traffic, that we are going to be in a position of taking more public input on that, because I am sort of amazed, and I will be honest with you, I'm asking people their opinion, and I have yet to get a positive response. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Ms. Hall.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Johnson, see you're moving up the list. A couple months, you'll be first.
Oh, I think that the facade looks wonderful too. That really is it's a real improvement. I think we should welcome ex-councilman, ex-state representative, and David Evans here this evening. Nice to have somebody come back and see what's going on. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rapp.
Thank you, I'll pass.
Mr. Valletta.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to call a safety committee meeting. I would also like to thank Jody Hall Arthur and Nancy Brown from the Licking Metropolitan Housing Authority for giving an excellent informational presentation to our safety committee last Monday. We had a great discussion as well. I'd like to thank Director Spurgeon and Director Rhodes for being responsive when there is an issue in the 4th Ward. I had a great time participating in the chocolate walk hosted by the Downtown Newark Association. I think it's a very positive thing for our downtown, and I think it's a great thing to have people out and about on our square visiting our local businesses. And lastly, I'd like to announce our 4th Ward Block Watching Group will have our monthly meeting at the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church at 592 West Main Street, Tuesday, May 27th at 6:30 p.m. With that, I pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roletta. Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, I want to thank Mr. Moran for making some comments about youth employment, because I got an email from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, and they are looking at taking applications for summer youth programs, and they're building maintenance, landscaping, food service, gardening, clerical work, and whatnot. So if you do know some youth, you can encourage them to go to ODGFS, and there's some summer jobs at least. So that is an announcement that I wanted to thank you for reminding me of. Other announcements is you may know that there's a new bakery coming open on the South 3rd Street, Lawton Square. That opening, their grand opening is May 9th at 12:30. And so if you wanted to come and support that new business, it's going to be opening up. It's 12:30 this Friday. Mount City Little League has their opening celebration at 10 o'clock this Saturday, May 10th. And so that's always a good time to come out and support the youth in the community and to support the folks that run that facility and that program. And I did want to make a mention about May 14th. You probably saw on the council chamber schedule that there's going to be a meeting here in this room about the Newark Youth Council. And Ruth Ziegler from CTEC, Beth Hill from Newark Catholic High School, Josh Duvall, Sue Grindrod from Newark High School, Beth Hill from Newark Catholic High School, and then Amanda Vazella from the Yes Club. There's some educators that are going to come together and want to talk about beginning the youth council starting this fall. And so the mayor's obviously invited, but I wanted to open and extend that to the rest of council. If you have time and want to come and participate in that activity, feel free to do so. It's May 14th at 4 o'clock. Going to be here in council chambers. And then I'll call a finance committee meeting, and then with that I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Buck?
Thank you. I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Mr. Cost?
I need to call for a service committee meeting, and with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. Mrs. Slow?
I'll call a personnel committee meeting for next Monday night. Secondly, the Midland has a number of shows coming up, so if you can go, I know I'm working. I worked the other day. I'm working 5 more shows this week or this month, including the Preservation Jazz Hall Band from New Orleans, which should be a great show. And the Midland is every time I'm there, almost every performer tells the audience what a great theater it is, and many of the people who come to the theater comment to us during intermission what a great theater it is, how lucky we are to have it. And we truly are. And finally, I want to remind everybody the community lunch at First Presbyterian Church on May 14th at 12 o'clock. The mayor's going to be there to speak. It's sort of an informal kind of thing. Come get a lunch and listen to the mayor and ask questions, and you're out of there by 1 o'clock. So if you come, please do so. First Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. Once again, thank you for coming to your Newark City Council. We certainly appreciate it. Our next committee meetings will be Monday the 12th here at 5:30. Next council meeting will be May 19th here at 7 p.m. And let's not forget about Mother's Day on Sunday. So make sure to wish all the moms a happy Mother's Day. Motion adjourned. Motion by someone over that way. Second by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
It's been a while since I've been there.
By somebody.